Hello, and welcome back to today's American Flyer Trains. Numerous American Flyer by A.C. Gilbert rolling stock, motive power, and accessories during the past 7+ years have gone across this bench. However, there's ones that I've not seen or rebuilt. One that I always wanted to see actually passed over my bench twice in the past 3 months. Once as a complete train set, not the catalog set, just the train, and the other as the motive power set. Now first, the motive power set is the one you see here in this video, 360, 364, which was branded as the 365 Santa Fe PA PB 360 364 Satin Silver Type 1 from 1951. This one was actually made in December of 1951. The other one, which passed over a little bit earlier, about 3 months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, had the same motive power set, but it had the 3 extruded aluminum passenger coaches. And of course, that was 5018W, branded as the deluxe passenger set, had the same motive power as you see here, and it was made in March of 51. Keep in mind the original 360 and 361 were introduced in 1950. So the first one with the passenger coaches, March of 1951. These, December of 51. Now, of course, the one I speak of as being the complete train set was 5108W, and it included the 365 set and 3 extruded aluminum streamline coaches, 660 Combine, 662 Vistadome, and 663 Observation. Both of the 360s are dual motor and they contain the reverse unit. And the PBs, both of them had an air chime whistle, and both were painted satin silver with a red war bonnet scheme. Both the train set and these motive power sets were very fascinating. I learned a lot from them and surfaced a lot of information I thought was interesting enough to share. They also were some of the best preserved trains I've ever seen. You can tell that by looking at this red paint on this one. It's got a little chip on the stripe around the nose, but they were still well preserved. And I think it was a lot to be said about the quality of workmanship and parts that A.C. Gilbert exhibited that may have diminished over the years and all the way through to 1966. But to me, there was nothing finer than these. Both sets were well taken care of. One set was with its original owner, who received it for a Christmas back in the early 50s, that had the extruded aluminum passenger coaches. That set I rebuilt and returned to the owner. This one has been in the same family, I believe, since 1951 and passed down through 2 generations, with the second generation now owning it. And it came to me not looking a whole lot different than what you see here. I did clean these up. I replaced some decals that had completely chipped off. But again, it's really well taken care of. Now, both for these 2 locomotives, the 365 set, and the set 5108W that can also contain these 2 locomotives, they were for the most part standard rebuilds. But I want to highlight some differences in these trains and some of the things that came out of those rebuilds. The extruded aluminum coaches were also rebuilt and were pretty standard, which in my language means that they were completely disassembled. They were washed, they were polished, properly lubricated, and included in that set cleaning and polishing the aluminum coaches and replacing the clear dome in 662. Light diffuser paper adjustments were made. In all 3 passenger coaches, I actually used the original paper but made some adjustments to it. The window silhouettes were removed, cleaned, washed, and reinstalled. And then I did some decal replacement and bulb replacements on both. Now in the 360 PA unit, one of the things I wanted to point out is that, of course, it has no front pilot, no coupler, no pilot, and nor did it have a standard coupler on the rear. That was because that these 2 units were connected by a fiber drawbar. Now, I actually believe that this one is the original. I've already taken it off and set it aside because I didn't want to damage it during the rebuild, but I believe it is original. Now, I had to replace the one that came with the train set. It had long been lost, and I replaced it with a metal one. And of course, on the rear is a link coupler. So if you've not seen one of these, yes, there was a generation of trains in which PA, PB were never intended really to be separated for all practical purposes. There's one interesting thing that I uncovered in doing some research, that it did not have the pilot, but of course we know that later trains did. If you have a Comet, that like I have, or a Rocket, or a Silver Flash Alco PA diesel, those diesel shells likely could have come from one of these. After the production was stopped on these, and they went to the cutout on the front and actually put the pilot knuckle coupler on the front, those came from that generation in which A.C. Gilbert, known to pass down and pass on parts to the next generation or type of trains, these were passed on to later generations. And if you have a Comet or a Rocket or a Silver Flash, you might want to go look at the pilot. And you might be able to see where A.C. Gilbert sawed out that front rather than molding it in. And if you hold this one at just the right light angle, you can see the saw marks on the interior right here. And you can even see where the saw heated up and built up a little plastic along the edge. So this one was actually made, I believe, from one of these leftover PAs that had the pilot was not cut out. Another telltale sign is whether or not you can see any red paint on these. Now this one has some red paint right here behind the steps, and on the other side right here behind the steps. So I believe this one was in fact at one time during its life came from one of these 360 Alco diesels and was cut out for later production. And of course, if you have a Comet, a Rocket, or a Silver Flash which does not have those saw marks or striation marks from being cut out right in here in the interior or along this line right here, you have one that was molded rather than having been passed down from this body. Another interesting note about these is that there were no pull-more wheels. Of course, we know that those had not been put into production yet, maybe not even invented. On both motors, all four wheels are contact wheels. They also don't have the slide or shoe contact, but I might point out perform exceptionally well. The decal fonts and types are a little bit different on these. The Santa Fe is a different font type, and this, I've never seen this American Flyer identification right here used again. It was a little bit different. The Indian Chief and the 316 numbering look very familiar, and of course so does the War Bonnet paint scheme. I think this red paint is of higher quality. It looked very, very good on both of these. Something else I had never seen was that the link coupler on the back of the PB unit had spring assist. You can see that tiny strand of a spring right there that assisted the coupler in going back down. It had tension on it. Pretty amazing. Now this one is in fact the best preserved spring-assisted link coupler I have ever seen. As a matter of fact, the spring actually received a separate part number. Now you cannot see it shown separately in the exploded diagrams, at least not the ones I have or have seen in the factory service manual, but it does have its own identifying part number. The one that was on the complete train set were in a lot worse condition. Some of them had already been removed, and of course the spring-assisted link couplers were on the extruded aluminum passenger coaches, and you can see that train in an earlier video I have on the channel if you subscribe. It's back there. If you go back a few videos, you'll see it. Some were missing, some had already been twisted and were coming off, and others, I think there was one on that train that was in as good a condition as this one. As a matter of fact, the spring-loaded couplers were found only on the 660 and the 500 series passenger cars from 50 and 1952. Also, if you disassemble the motor, which probably should be done on any train this age, you should notice that there are metal thrust plates on the chassis. Now this one has already been reassembled, you can't see them, but they were metal, they were not fiber, nor were they plastic. One of them had a sizable dimple that you could see with the naked eye, no doubt, but it wasn't worn enough that constituted being replaced. However, I did reverse it to go over to the smooth side, and it seems to work exceptionally well. Now this 364B unit, as well as the 364B unit that came with the one that I've already returned to the owner that came with the extruded aluminum cars, had air chime whistles that used a small speaker. Nothing unusual. We've all have seen those. This one, as well as the one returned to the other owner, had the small what I call cat food, or what's sometimes called cat food can type speakers. Nothing unusual. However, some of the 361 PB units in that first generation contained air chime whistles that used a small speaker housed in black plastic. And it looked like this. Now, originally these speakers were round. You can see this one is almost somewhat rectangular. And they were trimmed down and flattened by A.C. Gilbert, trimmed on this side and flattened so that they weren't completely round, to fit within the Alco housing, so it would fit in these. The speakers were repurposed from World War II aviation headsets that were manufactured by A.C. Gilbert for the U.S. Navy. I didn't know that until I spoke with another American flyer restorer and somewhat of a historian. Now, he said that when the war ended, the Department of Defense allowed A.C. Gilbert to retain the surplus on hand. A.C. Gilbert contacted the U.S. Navy, said, hey, I've got a bunch of headsets. You want me to ship them on to you? You've already paid for them, whatever. Navy said, nope, war's over. We don't need them. You can keep them. So A.C. Gilbert made use of them in the trains by trimming two of the sides. So if you can, envision these as circular and being the earpieces from a World War II fighter plane. I think A.C. Gilbert probably made more things for World War II than even we realize, and I understand there's also another interesting story about the motors that are in, say, the talking station and the log loader and some of those that are actually motors without brushes that had another purpose in World War II, in addition to the one that he made for the ailerons and the fighters that are, common, of course, as worm gear motors in these. So this one came, I think, from a 361. Now, one other little fact that came from the rebuilds on these was the length of the wire inside, the rainbow wire inside of these PA units. The PA unit rainbow wires from the reverse unit to the motor assembly had a loop in place that was held by a brass wire support clip attached to the top of the chassis with a screw. If you can envision and you'll see it in the still photography, you'll notice the rainbow wire comes up, goes back to the motor. It even has a loop in the top of it that's pinned down with a brass clip. Now this one wasn't pinned down with a brass clip. By December, apparently, between March and December of 51, A.C. Gilbert had already eliminated that extra brass piece. You'll notice it too in this motor, in that still photography, which should have been in a previous video. You'll notice how much it comes up and loops. Well, if you've ever worked on later models of these PA units where it has the dual motors, you'll notice how much shorter that wire is. And I know I personally, after having taken the side frames off, sometimes struggle to drop the motor down far enough that I can work on it because the wire is so short. I've had to actually loosen the reverse unit up, not screw it down to the chassis, pull it back over here so I got enough rainbow wire to drop the motor down and actually even begin working on it. This one was incredibly long. Didn't have to move the reverse unit. I simply dropped it down and it was more than an ample distance away from the chassis so that I could work on it with ease. It was amazing. And of course, later, to probably reduce costs, A.C. Gilbert shortened those wires, thus eliminating eliminated the wire clips that made it challenging to drop those motors and to have enough comfortable room to work on. The other thing I've noticed that you have probably noticed too in these rebuilds is that the PA unit has a single field clamp. Now you'll see that in that previous photography that is in a previous video, has a single field clamp that serves both as the field clamp and the yoke assembly over the motor. And we all know that in later issues of these PA units in the Alcos, they're separate items. There's the yoke that goes down to hold the motor in place, and then there's the field clamp itself that simply clamps the field on. I prefer the two rather than just one, because with one, not only are you holding the motor on, but you're using that to center the field around the armature. I very much prefer to get the armature centered first with its own clamp, and then insert that into the yoke, which supports the motor up underneath the locomotive. Thanks again for watching these American Flyer trains. So long, everyone.